In 2017, I went to Jamaica to attend a personal growth conference. And on the way from the airport to the hotel, I took a taxi and we went, and on the main road, all of a sudden the traffic stopped and there was a big construction happening on the road. And I could see it on the map that it seemed to be the only road leading up to the hotel. And so concerned, I politely asked the driver, said, "Hey, what's the problem?" And the Jamaican man just turned to me and said, "Hey man, in Jamaica, we don't have problems, only situations." And he took the car off-road through some tiny corners and down to the other side of the road, or other side of the construction, back on the road, and dropped me at the hotel. And as funny as this account may seem, I think I learned a very important lesson where, when oftentimes we encounter situations and we label them with our negative expectation. If they don't go according to what we expected them to be, we label them as problems, and that actually inhibits our ability to respond to that situation with a clear head. And instead of responding because we've attached an expectation on how it should have been, we react. We react with old pattern behaviors that we've learned through multiple bouts of reactivity. And the ideal way to respond would be to disassociate our expectations from the situations. And there are 3 ways that we can do that. First is a profound practice from mindfulness. It's called the art of pausing. Some scientists were doing an experiment where they got a couple who were going through couples therapy, and they connected EEG machines and the muscle testing sensors all over their body, and they got them in a room and they asked them to start talking about the therapy and the problem that they are both facing. And in about 5 minutes or so, when the conversation got into a conflict and you could measure their muscle tensions being high, their heart rate going up, their temperature is increasing a little bit, the experimenter would come in the room and say, I'm sorry, the machine just stopped working. Just give us about 10-15 minutes. Do you mind just sitting in the back? And we'll fix the machines and then we'll bring you back in." And they made them sit for 15 minutes without any agenda, but just in the middle of the problem that they were in a heated discussion with. And what they found, after 15 minutes, they got the same people back, talk about the same problem that they were in the middle of. And they noticed that they were able to tackle that problem in a more collaborative way. And their biomarkers were also referring to that. And they could measure that they were actually approaching the problem in a much more relaxed and calm and collaborative way. And that's what happens when we pause from a situation. And pausing actually is quite simple. We can do it in about 2 to 3 minutes. The simple practice that you can take from this is, when we are trying to approach a difficult situation that is right there in front of us, the simple pause of 2 minutes is as easy as taking 6 deep breaths. And you can do it through, take a deep breath through the nose, hold for a moment, and then breathe out. Close your eyes, and as simple as paying attention to what is happening in your body. It's as simple as that. Reality is, neuroscience has confirmed that an emotion, it's a physiological experience, and that physiological experience can pass through our system in 90 seconds, 1.5 minutes, where we experience an emotion. Let's say we get a shock, and then the heart will start racing faster, there'll be adrenaline and cortisol in our system and all of that. It'll have a physiological manifestation in our body. And it can pass through in about 90 seconds through our body, if not interjected with our thoughts, with our stories. What often happens is that when we experience an emotion, it spikes some thoughts. Our brain goes back into the memory library and says, when was the last time I felt something similar? And then pops up a story. And that story further perpetuates that emotion, right? And that emotion further perpetuates more stories, and it keeps on getting this vicious cycle. Instead, if we encounter a situation, if we maintain the ability to pause and sit with that emotion, 6 to 7 deep breaths, and paying attention to the physiological reaction. Is there tension in my stomach? Is my heart beating faster? Are my shoulders tight? What's happening with my hands? Do I have some tinglings in my hand? Just sitting with the exact experience that is happening and just bringing our awareness to it without any judgment can be good enough practice for us to give us the ability to respond in a wiser way. And that's the first step, pausing. And once we pause, the next step is to use this principle, what my mentor Eric Edmeades calls the hindsight window. The hindsight window is the window of time in between something that seemingly bad happens and then the time when we realize, it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. It's one of those moments when we hear like, hey, we need to break up, or you're fired, or a public humiliation of some sorts. And months later, years later, we realize that was one of the most incredible things that happened to me. We're so grateful. That window of time in which the moment that painful experience happens and the moment where we realize it's a blessing is what Eric calls the hindsight window. And turns out the longer the window is, the more miserable we are. And the shorter the window is, the more happier you'll be. And how to use the philosophy of hindsight window is that when we are experiencing something that seems to be a problem, which is an expectation that something that didn't meet our expectation, how it should have happened. When we experience something like that, we pause and ask ourselves, if this has to be one of the good things in my life, how might that be? If it has to be a good thing in my life, how might that be? The moment we ask that question, you see, our brain is super smart, right? Whatever question we ask our brain, it specifically answers that question. If we ask for a situation, the same situation, if we ask, how is this terrible? We get a list of 10 answers how the situation is absolutely terrible. And for the same situation, if we ask, how is the situation good? How might this allow me to grow? How might this create more joy and fulfillment in my life? And we'll start getting answers in that list as well. You see, when COVID happened for LifePlugin, it wiped out 95% of our business immediately on one day because we were an offline transformational experiences business. And so everything was wiped out, and it was really a situation that I could deem as shocking or as painful, and it would be reasonable to do so, right? And I had my moment until through the help of mentors, through the help of teachers, I was able to pause and process that experience. And we asked the same question to ourselves. If this has to be a good situation, how might that be? Right? And we started getting a bunch of different answers. It ended up making our business, the last 1 year, the most creative years in terms of creating new products. It got our team closer. It allowed us to expand our team in a smart way. It allowed us to focus on things that we could not before because we were running in a day-to-day cycle with our day-to-day operations. So many more beautiful things emerged from that. But it started with the question, if this has to be a good situation sometime in the future, how might that be? So that's the second step. And when we pause while dealing a situation and ask this question to ourselves, how might this be a good situation? The third step is to focus on the circle of influence. Once you've paused and centered yourself and asked yourself how this situation might be good for you, then from that place you can respond in a wiser way and focus on your circle of influence. You know, Stephen Covey talks about focusing on circle of influence versus circle of concern. When we are, in the cycle of reactivity, we tend to focus on the circle of concern, and it keeps on getting bigger. But that's the same thing with the circle of influence. No matter how small the circle of influence is, the few things that we can do, the more we focus on our circle of influence, the more it expands. Right? So ask yourself, what will be useful? What can I do in this situation? And no matter how tiny or how big those items are, start listing them down and start tackling them one by one. So that's it. These are the 3 steps. Pausing, using the wisdom from the hindsight window, and focusing on the circle of influence. So I hope this is valuable to you, and next time you face a problem, I hope you can channelize your inner Jamaican and tackle that problem.